This is ground zero for the transition.
Steve, you are an environmentalist and a cartographer. You've got some maps here of Sunny Corner Wind Farm.
We're here at Sunny Corner near Lithgow, about 3 hours drive west of Sydney, and this is ground zero for the transition. This is a small community. This is a community that's going to get surrounded by 300-metre towers. These are some of the maps that show you the layouts, where they're positioned. For example, this property here is only 1.7 kilometres away from the closest wind tower. That will be as high as Centre Point Tower in Sydney. There's 170 wind towers proposed for this district. No one talks about insect deaths from wind towers, but it is very significant.
What does that do for the whole ecosystem?
Microbats feed exclusively on insects. You take away insects, you take out the whole building blocks of life, really, because all of our amphibians, our reptiles, they all feed on insects. And you take out insects with 170 wind towers with 100-metre blades, it's a huge impact. A lot of these studies are being done in the Northern Hemisphere. We know the data, but it's not even a part of the assessment process here in Australia, the impact on insects. That's just one of a whole myriad of impacts.
In Queensland, there's a lot of really pristine rainforests that you've spent a lot of time going through and mapping and taking photos of. What are the kinds of species that you're seeing being impacted by wind farms in those areas?
In Queensland, these wind towers are going into our high elevation areas. These are places that we call remnant forests. These are the places that our ecologists are telling us that we need to keep in a changing climate. If the climate's warming, our mammals, our koalas, our greater gliders will migrate to those higher areas. And it's those areas that have been decimated by wind farms. There's a whole myriad of impacts on greater gliders, our raptors, red goshawks, everything. There's a wind farm in North Queensland called Gawarrabaya, and that will impact 12 endangered species. The magnificent brood frog, the Sharman's rock wallaby, the northern population of koalas, greater gliders, red goshawks, spectacled flying fox.
How does it impact these species?
Well, it's the industrialisation of these areas that haven't been touched. There's not only the impact of the blades, but it's also the fragmentation of forests. Haulage roads are generally 60 metres wide in the really rough terrain, so they need to cut and fill. There were some areas on the proposed Sholumbin wind farm where the road width would be 80 metres. Greater gliders never come to the ground. They need to glide from tree to tree. If you put a cutting through their habitat of 80 metres or 60 metres wide, they'll hesitate trying to cross those barriers. What we're going to see is the fragmentation of populations, and the genetic diversity of these populations will diminish.
What happens when genetic diversity diminishes?
The resilience of those population crashes. And we're seeing that with koalas in southeast Queensland, because koalas have now been squeezed into tiny pockets, little islands of forests. And then they interbreed, and the genetics gets weaker and weaker to a point where they're not resilient, and they'll get knocked out by another disease.
How do you expect the fire regime to change in this area from the wind farm being put in?
Two ways. Firstly, the authorities will want to protect their infrastructure, so they'll try to suppress any fire. And then there'll be a wildfire, because there'll be so much leaf litter and the forests have been left unmanaged. Forests need to be managed. Our Indigenous elders used fire as a management tool for thousands of years. And you take away fire from the landscape and then we get wildfires. We've already seen this at Caban Wind Farm. We had a huge fire go through there and firefighting crews couldn't get in there. And we're going to see a change in the biology and the forest makeup because fire regimes are changing. None of these issues are really assessed in the assessment process.
Do you think these projects, which are meant to be helping the environment, actually are?
I fail to see how they're protecting the physical environment, the habitat on the ground, and I fail to see how they're actually reducing carbon emissions, which is the end game.
Leaving trees in the ground is a very good thing in terms of emissions reduction.
Yeah, emission reductions in Australia. We're having far more success with carbon abatement, the reduction of our carbon emissions, by leaving forests in the ground. That is what we should be doing first and foremost. Keeping high biodiversity in the ground, forests and trees. The technology that we're introducing, solar, wind, that's really having a negligible effect on our carbon emissions.
We're destroying trees, which are what we need to store the carbon and get it out of the atmosphere, right?
Correct.
In order to build these wind farms. Wow, that really doesn't make any sense, does it?
That's the thing, the more you look into this, the more you see the futility of what we're doing.
You've spent a lot of time on the ground in Queensland at these wind farms. You've said before you find dead birds near these turbines. Yes. What kind of species are you finding there? How many are you finding?
This is another big story in itself because it's been swept under the carpet and it's very hard to access the data. And this has been done on purpose. The ecologists on the ground do their bird and bat surveys. That can be once a month or twice a month. And we don't know the effectiveness of of that, because what happens, a bat will get killed by a turbine at night. It falls to the ground. Now, we don't know if a predator comes in at night, like a dingo or a wild dog, or a koala, and takes that carcass away. So we don't really know if these figures are correct. However, what we do know is what has been released so far is quite horrific. The bird and bat deaths are considerable. The problem with the data is that it's hard to get the data, and the wind farms only need to do monitoring for 2 years. When they build the towers, it gets energised and they start turning and they do all their testing. In that testing period, the wind farm operators do not need to do a count of dead birds and bats. They only need to start the dead bird and bat count on the day it gets commissioned.
Okay, so we could have all of these birds and bats being killed by the wind turbines and no one would know because they don't have to track it at
No,
all.
not for the first energising stage of the project. Then it gets commissioned and then the official monitoring starts.
So would you say the official monitoring doesn't actually pick up all of the numbers of these endangered bird and bat species that are being killed?
We don't know, because the ecologists are working for the developers, and you have to understand that it's not in the best interest of the developers to showcase that they're killing Pacific swifts, which is what I found up at Caban as a carcass underneath a tower. There's the needle tail. If they go through a wind farm like Clark Creek, which has 100 towers, you can wipe out the whole population in one instance. So we're really concerned about the bird and bat deaths. Not to mention Robbins Island in Tasmania, where you've got the wedge-tailed eagle down there, which will be decimated by that wind farm. So it's a huge issue.
How do wind turbines affect koalas?
We hear a lot about low-frequency sound, infrasound, and the impacts that it's having on humans, and there's amazing new data that's coming to light. Koalas, they've got big ears and a big cavity in their skull to hear low-frequency sound. The reason being is because the male will grunt at night to attract a female. And the female could be 3 kilometres away, 5 kilometres away.
Wow, okay.
And the female can pick up on that and then go to the male.
Okay, so koalas are hearing sounds that even we can't hear.
Yeah, that's right. Now, there's a scientist called Dr. Roger Martin. He's Australia's most eminent koala expert, and he's taken it upon himself to radio track koalas in North Queensland. And what he's finding is that koalas will not come within 5 kilometres of a wind farm.
Because of the infrasound.
They can pick up on the vibrations, the low frequency sound. It's annoying, just like humans. I've camped in a tent 1.4 kilometres from a wind tower, and I had to get up in the morning and get out of there because I woke up with headaches.
So you're getting headaches and it's sound you can't even hear.
Yes.
Imagine what the koalas are feeling.
That's right. They can pick up on it. And all this science is not being done. So we're approving wind towers without even knowing what the impacts are on humans and also wildlife.
So you feel like the government is essentially turning a blind eye to the environmental impacts of these wind farms, which are supposed to be helping the environment.
They don't want to know what the impacts are on wildlife because this could be catastrophic for the industry. Roger Martin has written to WindLab pleading with them, can he go onto the site and put radio collars on the koalas in that area?
Because you can track whether they're moving away.
So you track them in their home, you blast in all the roads and infrastructure, you put the turbines in and then you energise the turbines and then you see what those koalas do. Do they stay there or do they move 5 kilometres away?
Can koalas just keep moving away from wind turbines and is that okay, or are they going to run out of habitat?
No, because what's happening, because we're smashing up their best habitat on the tops of the mountains. That's all they've got left of these mountain tops where there's remnant forests that are untouched. So they've only got these islands of forest and now we're knocking the tops off the mountains for wind towers. So they've only got these islands of forest and now we're knocking the tops off the mountains for wind towers.
Literally blowing up the tops of these mountains.
What's
where all
far
the
cheaper and
koalas
quicker?
live.
For example, the Shillumban wind farm in North Queensland, that was going to be about 145 kilometres of brand new roads meandering across all the ridgelines. To put rock breaking machines in would take weeks, months, years to knock out the tops of mountains to put in all the roads. You put in explosives, kaboom, blow them out a lot quicker, cost effective and cheaper.
Why do the roads have to be so wide for these projects?
This infrastructure is so big, the componentry is massive. The reason why the roads need to be so wide is to take in the sweep of the blade. If you're trying to get a 100 metre blade into the forest, you're going to have to clear probably a road 50, 60 metres wide for the sweep. The road needs to be compacted for heavy machinery. These concrete foundations have 1,000 cubic metres of reinforced concrete. So they need to build up temporary concrete batching plants on site. Most of these wind farms, because because they're so big in size, like here at Sunny Corner, they'll probably put 2 concrete batching plants in one either side, so they don't need to run concrete trucks from one side of the wind farm to the other side. The nacelle, the centre gearbox inside the turbine, they can range in weight from 300 to 500 tonne. 300 tonne pieces of componentry need to go up and down these roads. So the roads need to be engineered for those weights. Then you need an 800 tonne crane to get in there to lift the 300 tonne nacelle. So the concrete pads underneath the towers need to be compacted and compressed to take those weights. Transmission is another big issue that no one talks about, because transmission is another way of fragmenting forests. We've got to cut forests up, put transmission lines through habitat, across valleys and ravines and gorges.
So these are all areas where there's a lot of wildlife, very high biodiversity in many of those areas.
That's right, yeah. Every wind farm will need a new substation.
In terms of clearing land, that would be
It's another,
a fairly
it's
large
another
piece of
footprint,
land.
yeah, and we're seeing that in Queensland. We're seeing land cleared, really good habitat for substations, and also workers' camps and laydown areas.
Are they clearing critical habitat for workers' camps?
In some locations, yes.
Wow. So we're actually using diesel to build wind farms to decarbonise.
That's right. These wind farms in the construction phase might employ 400 to 500 people. Where I am in North Queensland, they're remote locations, so these work crews need to fly in, fly out. So there's more carbon emissions, and then they need to work at the workers' camp for 4 or 5 years. They have 20-foot containers, which are generators running on diesel, 24 hours a day, running the power for these workers' camps, running all the heavy machinery, the rock breaking machines and the excavators.
So basically, we are industrialising critically endangered habitat in order to save the environment. This really just doesn't make any sense, does it?
No, Matt, it doesn't make any sense. And I was a true believer. I marched the streets for climate action, and I was naive, and I thought by simply putting up a few wind farms and solar panels, we could decarbonise. But the more research that I've been doing personally, looking at what is required to do that is astronomical. And we're going to need tens of thousands of wind towers,